Good morning. Today is the 19th day of Iyar, the 27th of May. We're going to be looking at the second reading of Parsha Bechukotai, which is a very, very short reading. The Parsha itself divides into two main parts. The first part is the blessings and the curses, and the second part is more laws, most of them pertaining, again in some way, to laws pertaining to the land or to the self. These are very important laws. We'll look at them at the rest from Wednesday and on. But the first, second, and third readings are really blessings and curses. The blessings are very short. There are two readings, the first and second, today's also. But the third reading is the longest of the Parsha, and it contains all the curses. And there's a famous accounting enumeration that the sages do, that in this reading, Bechukotai, we have 49 curses, and these curses came specifically from God. And again, they're not meant to be curses in the usual sense. They're meant to be warnings, let's call them, against not upholding the covenant. And then in Parshat Kitavo, in Deuteronomy, Moses gives his own warnings, and there they total 98. So here we have 49, there are 98, that's twice as much. But it's very interesting that there are 49 because, again, we're in the middle of the Omer, and the counting of the Omer is 49. So there must be some kind of connection. We're not going to get into it now, although, just say one small word about it. Actually, we'll talk about it tomorrow, since tomorrow is the day in which the reading is all about these warnings. What we want to look at today is the verse that reads, it's in Leviticus 26:8, and it begins, 5 of you shall give chase to 100, and 100 shall chase 10,000. What is this verse talking about? It's talking about the strength of your army. That if you have 5 soldiers, they'll be able to chase 100, and 100 soldiers will be able to chase 10,000 of the enemy. On the face of it, this is great. And why is it especially good? Because the ratio between 100 and 5, meaning 100 of the enemy versus 5 of ours, is 1 to 20. So each soldier has a power of 20 men. Then when you get to 100 to 10,000, that 100 soldiers will pursue 10,000, so you're talking about 1 to 100. So you have this multiplier, that as you add soldiers, you don't just get a linear progression, it becomes what we call an exponential progression. There's a multiplier. I know this today is going to be a little bit mathematical, but bear with me because I think it's pretty amazing. I have never heard anything even similar to this in all my pursuit of mathematics in the Torah. So it's worthwhile to listen and try to get this. So that in the face of it sounds great, and the spiritual idea behind it, Rashi writes, is that when people join together in keeping commandments, their power multiplies. So it can multiply physically in terms of soldiers in an army, but it also multiplies in terms of spirituality. When you have a lot of people serving God together, it's much more powerful than just a few people. So all this is well and good, and we could have left it at that, except that a lot of the commentaries point out that in the book of Deuteronomy, specifically in chapter 32, verse 30, we have a flip situation. And the opposite situation is what happens when you don't keep God's covenant and the enemy pursues you. And there, the Torah writes, how is it, Eicha, it starts with the word Eicha, a famous word, which in Hebrew is the word that in English was translated as Lamentations, the scroll of Lamentations, which describes the destruction of the temple. So, how is it that one of theirs chases 1,000 of yours, meaning of ours, and 2 of the enemy make flee 10,000 of ours. So notice the numbers here. There are 1 of theirs chases 1,000 of ours, and 2 of theirs chases 10,000 of ours. Now, look at the ratios. 1 to 1,000 is huge. It's 1 to 1,000. 2 to 10,000 is 1 to 5,000. So how can you tell me that we're better off? And there's a principle, and this is a great principle in Torah, that the measure of good is always better or more significant than the measure of evil or of calamity. In other words, when there's goodness, it's always more powerful than negative things that happen. And here it seems to be exactly the opposite. We're chasing 5 to 100, 100 to 10,000. They're chasing 1 to 1,000, 2 to 10,000. They only need 2 to chase 10,000 of ours. We need 100 of ours to chase 10,000 of theirs. So right away you see, and there's a multiplier. It seems like there's a multiplier also. They're going from 1 to 1,000 to 1 to 5,000. It seems to be the same multiplier, by the way, which is 5. But let's not get into that, because you'll want to look at the numbers and then figure it out and see why the multiplier is 5 in both cases. How do you solve something like this? Well, you have to have Rav Ginsburg's mathematical mind. And nobody before him suggested something like this, because this is really modern mathematics. It's not that modern. We're talking about 17th, 18th century calculus. But still, this is you have to look at these things the way that a modern mathematical mind would look at it. And you really couldn't come up with this 500 years ago. There was no way that somebody could have thought of this. So what are we really looking at? We're looking at rate of change. Rate of change is what we call the derivative. So here's the trick. Even though in Deuteronomy, when it's the enemies chasing us, it seems that they're multiplying just as much, you don't have to say that. You can say that these are 2 points on a linear plot, on a linear graph. 1, 1,000, and 2, 10,000. And it's truly going higher because the rate of change is 5 times, but that's how it stays. That's called the linear change. So when we come to 3, what will they be able to chase? 3 of theirs. Well, it's just an extension of the line. So if we went from 1 xy being 1 1,000 and 2 10,000, so 3 would be, I believe, 19,900. That's all they would be able to chase. And it's a linear progression there. There's no reason not to say that, because you can't really tell. But comes Rabbi Ginsburg and says, I can even show you a hint that when the Torah is talking about this progression of power in our parsha, when it's talking about our power increasing, it's talking about a parabolic, meaning an exponential increase. A true exponential increase. The problem is, we only have 2 points, and to plot a parabola, you have to have at least 3. So we're missing a point here. We have 5, 100, and we have 100, 10,000. We need another point. So we could extrapolate by our logic and say, well, if 5 chase 100, what does 1 chase? This is actually part of the hint why this is a parabola. Because the Torah should have started like it did in Deuteronomy, from 1 chases 1,000 to 2 chase 10,000. Why in our case does it start from 5? Why not start from 1? Well, Supposedly, the reason is because you want to say that when there's more people, they have more power. But that would still be true if you would start from 1. Give us the number for 1. So what is it? Does 1 chase 10, let's say? Why doesn't the Torah tell us that? So Rabbi Ginsburg says that this really is calling us to understand that you can't just extrapolate back to the 1. It's not starting from the 1 because there's something very deep about the 1 that's not so easy to say. In fact, the real reason why you can't say it is because it's not a whole number. And the Torah doesn't have, there was no decimal point when the Torah was written. So there was no way to say that one of ours chases 11.735 of theirs. Let's say that that's the number. I don't know what the number is exactly. You'll see why in a second. But the Torah can't tell us what 1 will chase because there's no way to describe those numbers in the time of the Torah. So that's another hint to that. But he comes and says there's something more interesting here. Why is it that both reckonings finish with 10,000? Here in our Parsha, 100 will chase 10,000. In Deuteronomy, 2 will chase 10,000. 10,000 is the only common number. 1 is not common, 2 is not common, and 5 is not common. The only, and 100 is not in both. The only number that appears in both verses is Revava, which means 10,000. So he comes and says this, and I think this is a stroke of brilliance. The Torah wants to tell us about the 10,000 because from that point on, the derivative, meaning the rate of change of the good, goes beyond the rate of change of the negative. In other words, if the rate of change in Deuteronomy is 9,900, well, think about it, you'll see why. That's the dx dy there, 9,900. When we reach 10,000, that's the first time that the derivative of our parabola, of our exponential growth, when we reach 10,000, it's the first time that it will go beyond 9,900. So here we have a third boundary condition to solve this set of equations. Now, I don't want to tell you what the answer is, and I want to leave it for people at home to solve this. And if anybody wants to actually solve this set of equations, again, it's not very difficult. This is like 11th grade math, 10th grade math. But this is definitely math that was not around even 350 years ago. There was no commentator that said this. But the moment that you say that the rate of growth of goodness is exponential, while the rate of growth of the negative is only linear, then you have a beautiful mathematical explanation for why it is that this is part of the blessings. Because blessings grow exponentially, negativity can only grow linearly. To say it more mathematically, if it makes sense to someone, linear means that x is to the first power. Exponential means that we have x to the second power. So the rate of growth of x in the goodness is always to a second power. The rate of growth of x, the power of growth in the negative, is only x to the first power. It's just linear. So with that, I leave you, and I'll be happy to read any of the answers that are given on the YouTube. I think it's a beautiful challenge. And just one more word about it. Whenever we usually talk about mathematics in the Torah, we're talking about discrete mathematics. This is the first and maybe most basic example of how you start moving from discrete mathematics in Torah. Discrete means that we use whole numbers. And because Gematria uses only whole numbers, like we mentioned, there's no decimal point in the Torah's math. So we're always limited by using only integer numbers, whole numbers. But our mathematics is much more advanced, and we have continuous mathematics, not just discrete mathematics. So learning about the rate of change, if you remember from high school, the rate of change was the first step of going into calculus. It was the first step of moving between discrete mathematics and continuous mathematics, and more importantly, infinitesimal mathematics, which is the basis of calculus. So with that, let's end today. Hope to see you tomorrow. All the best.